Welcome to Mystery Explora, where we unravel the dark and twisted tales of history's most notorious criminals, unsolved mysteries, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Today, we dive into one of the most chilling cases in American history, the story of the Green River Killer, a man who evaded capture for decades while becoming one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. The Discovery. The story begins in the early 1980s in the Pacific Northwest along the Green River in Washington state. On July 15, 1982, two young boys discovered the body of a woman floating in the river near Kent, a suburb of Seattle. The woman was later identified as Wendy Lee Caulfield, a 16-year-old who had been strangled and discarded in the water. Just days later, the bodies of two more women, Deborah Bonner and Marcia Chapman, were found in the same area. Both had also been strangled. The discovery of multiple victims in such a short span of time sent shockwaves through the local community and law enforcement. It was clear that these were not isolated incidents. Something far more sinister was at play. The killer's modus operandi became apparent as more bodies were discovered. He targeted vulnerable young women, many of whom were sex workers or runaways, strangled them, and then dumped their bodies in or near the Green River. The press soon dubbed the unidentified murderer the Green River Killer. As the body count continued to rise, the case became one of the largest and most complex investigations in U.S. history. But despite the growing number of victims, the Green River Killer remained elusive, slipping through the cracks time and time again. With fear gripping the community and bodies continuing to be found, the King County Sheriff's Office launched an extensive investigation. Detectives were assigned to the case full-time, and the FBI was brought in to assist with profiling the unknown killer. One of the key figures in the investigation was Detective Dave Reichert, who would spend the next 2 decades dedicated to catching the Green River Killer. Reichert and his team painstakingly combed through evidence, conducted interviews, and followed every lead. But the killer was careful, leaving behind little forensic evidence, and the trail often went cold. The case attracted national attention, and with it, public pressure to catch the killer. As the investigation dragged on, the task force struggled to keep up with the growing number of victims. By the mid-1980s, the Green River Killer was believed to have claimed more than 40 lives, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. In a bizarre twist, the investigation took an unexpected turn when notorious serial killer Ted Bundy, who was on death row in Florida, offered his assistance. Bundy, who had previously committed a series of brutal murders in Washington state, claimed he could provide insight into the mind of the Green River Killer. Bundy suggested that the Green River Killer might return to the bodies of his victims, revisiting them to relive the experience. This insight, though chilling, was taken seriously by investigators, who began monitoring areas where bodies had been discovered, hoping to catch the killer returning to the scene of his crimes. Despite Bundy's assistance, the killer remained at large. The investigation continued to stall, with no arrests in sight. As years turned into decades, the case grew colder, and many feared the Green River Killer would never be caught. By the late 1990s, the Green River Killer case had all but gone cold. However, advances in DNA technology would soon breathe new life into the investigation. In 2001, 20 years after the first bodies were discovered, forensic scientists were able to use DNA evidence to link several of the victims to a single suspect: Gary Ridgway, a truck painter from Auburn, Washington. Ridgway had been on the radar of investigators as early as 1983, when he was arrested for soliciting prostitution. However, at the time, there was not enough evidence to tie him to the murders. Now, with the advent of DNA profiling, the task force had the break they had been waiting for. In November 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested. The DNA evidence was compelling, linking him to the murders of several victims. But as investigators would soon learn, Ridgway's crimes extended far beyond what they initially suspected. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ridgway eventually confessed to the murders. In chilling detail, he admitted to killing at least 71 women over a span of nearly 20 years, making him the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history by confirmed body count. Ridgway explained how he would lure his victims, often vulnerable young women, many of whom were sex workers, by offering them a ride or money for sex. Once they were in his vehicle, he would strangle them, often using a ligature, and then dispose of their bodies in remote wooded areas or along the Green River. His ability to blend into society while committing such heinous acts shocked investigators and the public alike. Ridgway was described as an unremarkable man, a father, and a churchgoer, living a seemingly normal life. But beneath that facade was a cold-blooded killer who had terrorized a community for decades. In 2003, Gary Ridgway entered a plea bargain, admitting to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder in exchange for being spared the death penalty. As part of the plea deal, he agreed to cooperate with authorities to locate the remains of additional victims. During his sentencing, the court heard harrowing testimony from the families of the victims, many of whom had waited decades for justice. Ridgway showed little emotion, his cold demeanor matching the calculated nature of his crimes. Ultimately, Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated to this day, his legacy one of unimaginable horror and loss. But for the families of the victims, there was finally some measure of closure, knowing that the man responsible for so much pain was behind bars. The Green River Killer case left an indelible mark on the Seattle area and the nation as a whole. The sheer scale of the killings and the length of time it took to catch Ridgway highlighted the challenges of investigating serial crimes, particularly when the victims are marginalized members of society. The case also led to changes in how law enforcement handles missing persons cases, especially those involving sex workers and runaways. The use of DNA technology in the Green River Killer investigation set a precedent for future cases, demonstrating its power to solve even the most daunting of cold cases. But the scars left by Ridgway's crimes run deep. The families of the victims, the investigators who dedicated years to the case, and the community that lived in fear during those dark years continue to grapple with the legacy of the Green River Killer. As we reflect on the Green River Killer case, there are important lessons to be learned. The case underscores the importance of persistence in investigations, the need for empathy for victims often overlooked by society, and the critical role of advancements in forensic science. Gary Ridgway's capture and conviction were a testament to the tireless work of detectives like Dave Reichert, who never gave up in their pursuit of justice. The case also serves as a reminder that even the most ordinary seeming individuals can harbor the darkest of secrets. While the Green River Killer's reign of terror has ended, the impact of his crimes will be felt for generations. And as with all such cases, we are left to wonder, how many other killers like Ridgway are still out there, waiting to be unmasked? The story of the Green River Killer is a sobering reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. It's a tale of tragedy, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice in the face of overwhelming odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of America's most notorious criminal cases. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the mysteries, unsolved cases, and the twisted minds behind some of history's most heinous crimes, only here on Mystery Explora.